So welcome everyone to the special edition of the Microsoft Build 2020 conference. You already own it webcast. I'm really excited. There's a lot of great stuff to talk about in this session. So we're going to have a number of presenters, including myself, Bob Ballard, Mark Quickle, Scott Dowling, also a special appearance by Kev Nubler as well, that sort of was brought in to talk about a little more in depth on some topics since I made the opening slide. So we're really excited to get started. So let's go through just a couple of housekeeping items here. So your UR team is myself, Bob Ballard, Principal Cloud Strategist here at Planet. Newly added Nia Giles, George Scott, Ken Nubler, Scott Dowling, of course, with Mary Tucker keeping us all in line and making sure we deliver all the things we promise, and all on the guidance of our Vice President, Steve Winter. So again, don't forget that one of the services available to you as a You Already Own It customer, one of the benefits is that you can email the You Already Own It at go-planet.com. When you have questions or concerns, most of you folks are good customers of ours, and we talk to you regularly. But even so, if you have some questions about things that how certain technology might work, or want to talk through something, what might be maybe some decisions around licensing, all those kinds of things, all fair game. Feel free to email You Already Own It at go-planet.com. So the agenda here is we've got we're going to give an update on the Build 2020 conference. We purposely waited a few weeks after the conference to try to get a few more details as they start to leak out, and we'll do our best. But of course, understand, as been around the Microsoft world these days, some of these don't have all the details available yet, but we're going to do our best to give you what we can, but also, what we know and how it may, what you should be thinking about as, a customer with these technologies, right? Not just here's what it does, but here's what you need to know. So, so we're going to start off with sort of the core developer topics with Mark Quickle. He's been gracious to be able to join us. He's our technical practice manager for our dev and data, as well as SharePoint collaboration teams. He's going to go first, and then I'm going to go over and talk about the Office 365 related announcements, as well as having Ken Nubler join me. And then we're going to finish up on Azure and data stuff with Scott Dowling, and go from there. Feel free to throw questions in the chat window. We'll certainly open up towards the end of each section to see if there's any core questions as well. And we'll try to get everything we can answered, or take action items if we can't. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark Quickle. Are you there, Mark?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon officially for those on the East Coast, and for those not, good morning. So I'm starting off today talking a little bit about some of the exciting announcements that came out for developers. And because it's Build, there were a number of them. There's stuff around Azure Machine Learning and cognitive services, a lot of DevOps stuff, and some new .NET features. So today I thought what I would do is take a look at just a few DevOps ones, and then I asked my team to pick what their #1 dev update would be. And as a kind of a spoiler, I guess, on the slide here, but I was going to keep it a surprise until the end. But so let's just dive right in. First of all, Visual Studio Live Share now supports voice chat. So there were some existing extensions in the past for Visual Studio Code to support voice text chat, and now text chat has become a first-class citizen built right into the product. And audio chat is also now available in public preview for Visual Studio Code. So this is in addition to the ability to add comments to specific sections of code in a live share session. And this is really important, I think, because as we saw with spring of 2020, becoming effective in remote scenarios is becoming more and more important. And I'm just excited to see the addition of adding new capabilities to make the product better. So if you haven't used Live Share before, it's been out for a couple of years, and it's natively bundled with Visual Studio 2019, and also works with Visual Studio Code. Unfortunately, the newest features, that the text and voice chat, are only available in Visual Studio Code right now, or for Live Share insiders, but that is changing very, very soon. And so what is it? Live Share, again, if you haven't used it, it provides you the ability to co-author, co-debug, have an audio call, do a chat with your peers, share terminal windows, servers, or look at comments in a code review session. And so if you're working on a team of developers, it's not just necessarily one or two developers either. You can use these in education scenarios, like if you have learning, classrooms learning around code. You can have up to 30 users in a session reviewing this code, providing comments. You can make sections read only if you like, or editable. And it's really a really fantastic tool. The app sharing capability of the product also allows you to share out a session. So for example, if you have a React application that you're developing and you're writing your code, you can have a code review session where folks can come around, review the code, but they can also see what you're typing, potentially in an NPM terminal window, or they can see your application as you're debugging it. And that's super powerful because that developer doesn't even need to download their project to their computer. They get it as if they were natively running it. It keeps all of their preferences and favorites, and you can see each other's mouse cursors and things like that along the way. So, I know we're going to talk about Teams in a little bit here, but Visual
Yeah,
Studio.
hey, Mark, I actually had a question on that. I mean, so how is this different than Teams? Because that's what as a Teams guy here, I'm curious, right? How is this different?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. We're actively using Teams here. We have a group here, but our group of developers, a lot of us have made the investments in large ultra-wide monitors, and those monitors are fantastic for improving our development workflow. But the issue is that sometimes they're not too friendly with Teams, because the Teams windows may artifact them, or they're just too small to fit everything in there. And so that's been a problem for us. So what ends up happening is users end up, they'll share their Visual Studio window alone, and then they'll switch to the application window, and then they'll switch back to the Visual Studio window. And it's very disruptive to the process. Using this, the user gets that full fidelity of their widescreen monitors on both sides. So that's really cool. The other thing is the inline comments. So as we do code review sessions over Teams and through pull requests, we may put comments into the PR directly, or we may put comments in a team chat. And the nice thing about the live share capability is not only is the new version have the audio chat and the text chat built right in, but if there's a section of code, you can say, I don't want people to be able to edit this code, but I want them to be able to comment on it. And you can see those comments specifically in context to where the challenges may lie. So that's the Visual Studio Live Share updates. I'm really excited about it. Again, some of the stuff is still coming for the 2019 users proper. Continuing on with DevOps for GitHub users, the GitHub team announced a ton of new and exciting features as part of their remote satellite event, and we can provide the link to that if that's at all helpful. But we're talking about new discussion capabilities. Visual Studio Code Space, essentially in GitHub Code Space, is a way to support cloud-based development. But I really wanted to just pick one or two things out of that session and talk about it here. And because we do a lot of Azure DevOps and GitHub work, we're kind of enormous fans of both. We do a lot more work in Azure DevOps proper, but you can mirror code between the two environments. And then you can run GitHub Actions and security scanning. And the GitHub product, they have a GitHub Advanced Security product out, and they've introduced 2 new features. One is code scanning, which is now available as a GitHub native experience, and then secret scanning. So the code scanning thing is based on their CodeQL, which came out last year, and it's a static code analysis tool, and it can analyze C, C++, C#, Go, Python, a few different languages, and they've just made it easier now to be able to inject that into your life cycle. The results are displayed right in the pull request, and then the developers can analyze and learn from that. The secret scanning capability, that's been available for public repositories for a while, but they're also making that available for private developers, private repos for developers. And that's part of their advanced security offers, offering as well. I think GitHub announced somewhere around the nature of like 10 million potential secrets were identified in their public repos, and 8% last month alone. So they're trying to make this offering available for the private repos. And the idea there, right, is, the recommendation we typically make is use Key Vault, store your secrets and things like that in Key Vault, not in your code. And there's still cases where people will do that. And in this service will scan automatically for those. They've worked with several of the cloud providers to better understand what their signatures look like, and then they will send the developers notifications letting them know, hey, you have some vulnerabilities in your code. And we're really excited about this. We work with a lot of government customers and commercial customers that are sensitive to, operational security with regards to DevOps. And so the idea of shifting left means that more and more vulnerabilities are understood earlier in the process, and these announcements kind of help with that.
So Mark, you were talking about, code scanning and secret scanning and some stuff around Key Vault. Were there any other announcements regarding security around there? I mean, I think I remember a few when I was watching the video. What else is left?
Yeah, when we think about like secure DevOps in general, I mean, that's kind of a topic all in itself. But the interesting thing is Microsoft's commitment to both GitHub and Azure DevOps as 2 products that are both converging in certain ways and they're dividing in other ways. And we've been like spending the last few years looking at Azure DevOps integrated pipelines with like open source tooling for code quality and that type of thing. But the other things that we look at are, dependency checking across open source, even things like improvement in user role definition and operational management. So Azure Active Directory Federation across both, for example. And then of course, Azure policies, blueprints, reporting, monitoring, things like that.
So I just have one more question on it, and if it's too big a question for right now, that's fine. We can table it. But so what I've always, one of the benefits of the You Already Own It call, right, is we try to help steer customers. What can they do now? What does this mean to them? So these kind of, now, I mean, you talked about some of the things that could be done here, but like what should customers be doing? Because in my mind, right, security and compliance in our customer segment base is pretty substantial, right? So what should they be doing now?
Yeah, well, I'll try to answer that very briefly. I think the first question is, are they doing any sort of custom development? And if not just straight up like C# custom development or whatnot, do they have open source libraries they might be using for things? Are they writing reports, or are they doing SQL related work where they might have projects like stored procedures or other things? And are they wanting to store that that data securely? And then are they using any of these Microsoft platforms? Because if they are, I think one of the things my team is going to be going back and doing, as we do it every year as we look at these announcements, but we're going to start looking at what's Microsoft's shift with these things. And it looks like they're definitely positioning GitHub to be better in some areas than Azure DevOps and vice versa. And so if you're an entirely Azure DevOps shop today, one of the things that you're going to want to look at in the next probably 6 to 12 months is, what is your strategy to be a GitHub/DevOps environment and vice versa?
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. We're talking about GitHubs. The other thing that just very quickly they announced is they now have GitHub Actions for Azure integrated into Visual Studio Code, the CLI, and Azure. So what does this mean? If you're on GitHub, automated deployments to Azure, either databases, app services, functions, containers, all of that's getting easier. And so they announced a few things like Visual Studio Code extensions for continuous build and deployment, new Azure CLI extension support for Azure Kubernetes clusters. And then in the Azure portal, GitHub Actions are now a build provider in the deployment center for app services as well. And because we talked about key vaults earlier, there's don't forget to use the get key vault secret action in your deployment lifecycle as well. Last DevOps topic, really quickly. For Azure DevOps, Elastic self-hosted agent pools are soon coming to preview. And that's a pretty popular thing that people have been asking for, because sometimes teams don't want to use the Microsoft hosted agents. They want to have more control. They want to be able to set up the capacity or speed differently. And in the past, it hasn't been easy necessarily to scale up or scale down the virtual machines. So these Elastic self-hosted agent pools, they run in a VM scale set in Azure. And then you can specify how you want that to work with Azure Pipeline managing the agents as needed. So that's kind of a pretty cool thing as well. In the preview, they did announce that you will not be able to run UI tests with these Elastic pools for now, but that's a feature that's coming.
So, Mark, I think I'm following, not being, being more of an infrastructure guy than a dev guy, which I rely on you a lot for helping me think this through. But like, can these run on machines on containers, or what's the deal with that?
I can't quite confirm that, but rumor has it that these scale sets will be available in Q3 of this year to run on a Kubernetes in Azure specifically, with other infrastructure coming later. So I think we'll hear more about that.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
All right. Lastly, the topic, there's again a lot of things. I asked the developers what's the most interesting thing, and they voted for Blazor WebAssembly. That was announced as officially released during build. So what is it? For those of you that have little or no experience with Blazor, it's an open source and cross-platform web UI framework for building SPAs or single page applications solely in .NET C# and without any JavaScript. So Blazor is a component-based system. It uses a similar paradigm to, say, React or Angular in its component system, but they can be hosted in different ways. And for the past year and a half, 2 years, they've been talking about Blazor Server. That's been available for a little while, as long as you're using .NET Core. And that allows you to host the components on a server using .NET Core with all the UI interactions and updates being handled by WebSockets across the wire. And it's really, really easy to implement. It's probably the easiest way to get started with Blazor. But the WebAssembly was the new announcement, and that's a .NET runtime that is implemented in WebAssembly. And it gets downloaded with your Blazor app whenever you navigate to the site, and it executes that .NET code directly in the browser without any plugins. No transpilation has to happen. It works with all your modern browsers and both desktop and mobile, and in the security context of the browser. So it's kind of a cool thing. It works with a variety of UI components as well. So if you're using DevExpress, Telerik, those types of things, it'll work. And one of the cool features about Blazor is that it does support calling JavaScript functions directly from .NET and vice versa through JS Interop. So just to finalize on that point, why we're excited about this, we work on projects a lot of different sizes. Some are 2 to 4 week projects, some are 2 to 4 year projects. We work with small consultant, as consultants to smaller development groups. Sometimes we're brought in to be part of a bigger group, and everybody's got different experience. And sometimes people will come to us and they say, we want you to build this project, but we really want it to be in React because that's what our developers better understand. Or we want this one to be in jQuery and Bootstrap because that's what our developers understand. But most organizations we work with know .NET. So the cool thing here is, even if you have developers, although there's going to be some learning curve around the component model, even though they may not understand all of that right out of the gate, they don't have to know the details and nuances of JavaScript any longer if they want to build single page applications. So on top of that, it's open source and has a strong community, and the tooling is pretty good. So we'll see how well it fares in the market with time. We saw things like Silverlight and other technologies kind of come and go. So we'll see how this works. But hey, we love shiny new things, and we love working with our customers that love shiny new things. So I'm excited to give it a try.
So thank you, Mark. So first of all, before Mark, because I think Mark has to leave at the bottom of the hour for a conflict. So if you guys have any questions specifically related to the dev tools, get them in the chat window now. There is one sitting in there for you, Mark.
Okay.
Which is, do you need any Azure or O365 structure behind the live share, or can you form groups in any ad hoc manner?
Yeah, you do not need any additional Azure or O365 infrastructure set up to do it. When you initiate a session, a user will initiate that session, and they will get a shared link similar like you would for 365, and then they can share that link with whomever they like, and those folks join that session. Do keep in mind that the live share session is encapsulated itself, so any of the artifacts and things that are a part of that become a part of that session.
Awesome. Thank you. Are any other questions for Mark before we move on to sort of some of the O365 announcements? Going once, going twice. If you have questions, you think about them later, put them in the chat window, and then I'll get them over to Mark. Mark, or you can always go back to the meeting and just kind of see, and we can respond back with the answers to those.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. All right. So let's shift gears to sort of the Office 365 announcements. And so remember, right, so this is the Build conference, right? So the focus is going to be primarily on sort of integrations and developer oriented topics in general, right? But they also announced some things that I think are very much in the sort of democratic, the citizen developers strain as well, and we sort of brought some of those in to this conversation. So Microsoft is sort of there's lots of indications. Microsoft, one of the things we like to do here on You Already Own It is try to help you understand where is Microsoft taking you, right? Because obviously that helps you understand what you should be focused on as an organization as well, right? Obviously you need to focus on your goals, but where Microsoft's going will certainly make that path easier or harder, right? So one of the areas where Microsoft's definitely transitioning, so as many of you know, right, there's been tremendous broad uptick in adoption of Teams across the board. Just a couple of months ago, we're talking about our United States Military Academy story about their broad adoption of Office 365 and Azure, and Teams was a huge part of that. I have dozens and dozens and dozens of customers that have sort of seen that ramp up over the last year. So building on that, I think the next key area that Microsoft is focusing on, and there's lots of indications internally from them, is sort of the Teams as a platform concept. So customers are adopting Teams for the basic stuff, right? They're doing these meetings, they're doing chats, they're collaborating around documents, they're creating teams and channels and all of those things. So where do we go from here? So to sort of kick off this conversation, I'm going to bring in Ken Nubler, who's sort of leading the charge. The whole team is super focused on this, but he is sort of leading the charge from my team, the Cloud Strategist team, around Teams as a platform to sort of talk about a few of those team as a platform elements and a couple of other things too as well. And then I'll come back and and talk about the remaining things on the agenda. So Ken, want to go ahead and start?
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. And Bob's absolutely right. For the first few years, people have been kicking the tires on Teams, using it at the 100 level. Well, what Microsoft has now announced at Build is taking Teams to the next level, and Teams as a platform. And what does that really mean? It means basically mashing up the power of Teams, which is extremely powerful by itself, but also mashing it up with another very powerful platform called the Power Platform. For those of you who don't know what the Power Platform is, it's an application platform that enables customers to build no-code, low-code bots, analyze data through Power BI, and automate processes and build line of business processes. It includes service products like Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and the Power Virtual Agents, which then have some other additional capabilities like connectors and artificial intelligence builders and the common data service that the Dynamics platform runs on as well. So extremely powerful, obviously, platform for building line of business applications, and now taking that incredible, powerful platform and mashing it up with Teams is going to be something to see in the next 6 months, 12 months as this rolls out. So the first thing that Microsoft has announced is the fact that they're going to be building templates. They've announced at least 12 templates to begin with. So in deploying Teams now, you can actually pre-package or build templates from scratch, Teams templates. You can modify those templates, and you can templatize any existing team. So if you have a great format for a team, you can now copy and paste, make that as a way to deploy your teams across your organization. You can even package the teams with line of business apps already built into them, which is incredibly powerful. In the future, Microsoft's also announced that they're going to release some policy-based controls that admins will be able to target templates to specific users, which is extremely powerful. So that'll help with the whole, how do you build a template, but actually marry it to a group of users. Some of the templates that they've announced so far are event management, crisis management, and then, hospital wards or people who are doing shift work. That'll be another template. As a service provider myself in the past with the state of North Carolina, we started building templates for human resources, change management, incident management, interview committees, application development, social event planning. So, your juices start flowing about the power of these templates so that everyone doesn't have to figure out how to create a prepackaged team. And then obviously taking those templates to the next level by marrying them up with the Power Platform, obviously with line of business, is where the power is all at. So that's the first announcement, is the Teams as a platform and templates coming to you soon, and the management of templates coming to you soon.
Hey Ken, there's one point I want to make too that I think is important. Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
So when we're building these templates, right, it's not just some basic look and feel things. It's the inclusion of specific channels or integrations with apps. And I think you alluded to the apps thing before. Right. But the idea is, hey, if we think the right format, whether it's a custom team or one of these first party, pre-created teams, it comes with all of that in together, yep. Right? So when they're designing the, I think you mentioned the, crisis management or whatever, it might have a series of tabs, a series of channels, all those things pre-built, and that will roll out as part of the template. And, I think that's really, really powerful in that, where, we can just sort of drag and drop and deploy things, use them as frameworks for other things. If there's a set of tabs or channels or things like that, that every template should have in your organization, you can start thinking that way.
Absolutely. So therefore, you're not giving users more than they need to see. They give you just enough to do your job or that line of business app that you're doing in Teams, which I think is really helpful because you don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be for that single point of glass type of application. To add to that, so another announcement they made was about the Bookings app. If you haven't heard about the Bookings app yet, this is a really cool app that's coming to Teams. Think of it as a way to book an appointment with external folks. So whether you're a human resources group trying to schedule interviews with folks that need to pick times and dates for interviews, those people on a mobile phone could go to that app and pick what available slots are available for interviews. Or, my God, let's think about the DMV and picking a DMV time for bookings. I mean, incredible workflow that could be built there in state agencies as far as externals being able to book times for meetings, whether that be for the DMV or for healthcare workers or whatever. So Bookings app is coming soon as well.
I just a couple of points on that too, because there's actually somebody at Planet that's using this that I just noticed. He just started using it recently, which Matt Nevins, our principal cloud architect. It really opened my eyes to think about it different ways, right? Like, so I think the points that you're making are fantastic and clear, like first case stories to use these for. By the way, for our commercial customers, because there's a bunch of those on the call too, right? For our commercial customers, there are there's making appointments and engaging with your organization, et cetera. But even the things that started popping into my mind was even things like scheduling time with help desk resources, or many organizations have sort of like IT liaisons, and all of these scenarios started swarming in my head. Or like I said, in the case of Matt Nevins, he actually just has a link embedded in his Outlook profile now that says, you want to talk about an IT solution, click this button and schedule 30 minutes with me now. Right.
Yes.
So there's a bunch of really interesting scenarios that I sort of dismissed. And now the more that I think about it, I think there's probably more real world possibilities here with bookings than I had initially thought.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Bob. The next item was Power Automate triggers. This new capability unlocks custom message extensions and allows for automated app mentioning and customized bot experiences. So think about this as a power, anytime you're app mentioned in a team or a workflow, other workflow kicks off, incredible power there for Power Automate triggers based around the app mentioning of a user into a workflow. That's going to be really cool to see. Power Virtual Agents Teams app is coming. You may not know this, but there's probably, there's a whole bunch, probably 20 or so already pre-built virtual agent bots built into that are available on the App Store. Things specifically as a service provider, again, for a state perspective, request a team app. Very helpful type of apps coming to you soon. The ability to actually do a one-click add to the team to create to integrate these bots into your teams is coming, and that's part of that announcement right there. And then, so the question is how do you start building these line of business apps, right? Well, they're now supporting Teams creation or Teams app creation in Visual Studio Pro apps, Power App Studio. I'm sorry, Visual Studio and Power App Studio integration will be supported in creating apps for your developers. Since they're already familiar with those apps, it's a good experience for them. And it'll enable them to publish those apps directly into AppSource or the organization's app catalog, which was always, something as a service provider, again, I was always concerned about how are you going to manage these apps. The ability to also have approvals on those apps is coming from an administration standpoint, which was huge news for me once the app is published into the store. So those things are coming. And how do you validate and approve line of business apps for pre-install independent software vendors or line of business apps for their users? All that approval process is coming into the App Store for the Teams admins. And lastly, single sign-on. So when you're creating these applications, you want to have a good user experience. You don't want to have the user have to re-authenticate every time they go into a customized app. Single sign-on is coming, as well as the activity feed API for developers, so that they have a new and simple way to send app messages across all the users' devices. So those are huge. So wrapping it all up, consider all these announcements as part of the power of building low-code, no-code options to natively integrate into the Teams platform. Again, this is Teams as a platform. It's the marriage of two incredibly powerful platforms, the Teams platform and the Power Platform. And so, things to start thinking about is governance, right? So that's probably a topic yet to come in a future. You already own it, and we're already talking about that internally. I can tell you that. But Power Platform governance is going to be huge as we move forward with figuring out how to monitor and understand what's being used in the tenant and approve things and understand what can be done in the tenant from a management standpoint. So more to come on that. Bob, I'll kick it back to you.
Sorry, it helps to come off mute. Thanks, Ken. There's just a couple left on the list to talk about. In particular, trying to stay on time. I'm going to focus on two that are left that sort of fit in there that I think are particularly interesting. So one is NDI support, right? So what the heck does that mean? Well, what we start having, so as we started talking to our customers, right? So obviously, the whole COVID-19 situation has sort of made a whole bunch of people think about their their business processes, right? Whether they be government entities or commercial customers or whatever it might be. The idea is, hey, I want to do, I suddenly need to have these major meetings. Take the government, city council perspective, right? How do we take city council meetings and leverage them and think about them in multiple ways, right? So one of the things, of course, what everybody wants to start talking about is, well, can I do them in teams? And yes, you can certainly do them in teams, right? But there's a 250 user limit in the standard Teams experience. They're actually going to up that to 350. That announcement sort of came out recently as well, not part of Build, but separately, along with a bunch of other great things like 49 video stream windows in a Teams event is sort of on the way. We've probably seen it's been up to 9 in a bunch of cases, but it's going to 49 7x7. So those things have happened sort of out of the Build framework in their announcements, but there's been a bunch of things around this. But the issue still is, okay, well, then we go to, Teams live events, and there's a bunch of great capabilities that are built in there about event production and how to handle that. But at the end of the day, what most of the organizations want to do is they want to take these structured team meetings and route them to platforms, right? Facebook, streaming, YouTube, any of these standard streaming platforms, because that is where people are looking. Look, I live in Maryland, and several times a week, the governor has been streaming live with, here are the new rules, here's what you need to do, we're going to phase 2 in opening things up, and all of these things. I've basically watched that entire thing unfold over the last 3 months on Facebook Live. And so these are the sources that people are comfortable with, right? So how can we take the native tools, use this comfortable, familiar experience, and integrate them with these live streaming services so that we can make these events public, city council meetings, all of those kinds of things, other, broad announcements, right? So we don't have to work in a separate set of tools. We can work in these comfortable tools that we know about. So that's really, really interesting. And it's something that caught me off guard because I had heard very little about it prior to the announcement. The other big one that I want to talk about is Microsoft Lists, right? And this is a really interesting one that took me a little while to totally get my head around it. So the idea, so we all know, right, there's a to-do list that's in Office 365 today, right? That's very much geared for personal sort of productivity. And then, we've had SharePoint lists for 20 years, right? And, the whole idea about SharePoint lists is, a list to store data that we can create sort of workflows and applications out of. And those aren't going away, just to be clear. But the idea behind lists is taking that experience, adding extra capability, and potentially sort of decoupling it from having SharePoint be the only place it comfortably delivers, right? So the idea is that I can take these lists and sort of create them as their own living entity, including, those that are familiar with a lot of the other applications. If I go to Planner, I can see all my plans and all the available plans and all the things that I have permissions and access to. So I can land on a single place. And what are all these lists that I have access to? But more interestingly, and I think this is really why this is important, is I can embed them in Teams, right? So now it's really easy. I can take a list, do the kinds of workflows and application like capabilities using Power Automate or other native tools that are native capabilities that are built into the actual Teams interface itself for citizen developers as well as professional developers to take these lists and turn them into applications and publish them to Teams, SharePoint, whatever, or just natively by themselves as standalone sort of application lists. And this is really, really interesting, right? The cool things like the ability to, just through a couple of clicks, do I want it to look like an Excel spreadsheet kind of thing, right? Like it just looks like a classic list. Do I want it to have a info card view where it's a series of cards that I can click on and drill down and get in additional information? Do I want it to have do I want it to have a view more like a calendar view, right? It's, planning for an event and I want to use a list. I can assign tasks in these lists. I can use things like @mentions in these lists. And I can also actually create threads around each of the list items, right? So it's some really powerful things that are very interesting, taking everything you've been comfortable and used to with SharePoint lists, adding some additional capabilities and making them available really easily to be published to teams and other elements within the Office 365 platform. This is one. There are a number of things. There's a great product group video that sort of has an overview. It's like 18 minutes long. I'll make sure to get with our follow-up thank you email here to make sure that you guys get a link to that in the communications, because I think it was great to sort of get a quick overview of what it's all about, done by one of the product managers as well. So before we shift and go on to some of the Azure announcements with Scott Dowling, were there any questions out there on some of the Teams as a platform capabilities, or any of the other lists, or any of the other Office 365 capabilities? Any questions out there? Going once, going twice. I'll be on for the remaining 10 or 15 minutes. So was somebody going to ask a question? Okay, I will turn it over to Scott. Take us home, Scott.
Thank you very much, Bob. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, great. Thank you. So there are quite a number of items not related to the DevOps portion of the Azure platform that were announced. In looking through them, I just wanted to highlight a handful of these. Although I do recommend, if there's any interest that has been built during this call to learn more about what was announced, please, I recommend you look into it, because there's quite a bit. A lot of it is in preview, which, as you know, within Azure, when something is in preview, it is free to use. So it's a really great time for your IT folks to log into the Azure tenant and start playing around with some of these things while they can, for no additional consumption typically. So the couple of the things that I pulled out from the Build conference that were of interest to me, first and foremost is the Azure Synapse link. So as a former DBA for the state of Pennsylvania, my heart still resides within the data platforms within our organizations that extend into BI, as it's been a challenge for decades now to get really good insight into our business's data. And then, of course, the dream of doing predictive analytics to help us drive decisions, future decisions and road mapping within our organization. So before I talk about the Synapse link real quick, just want to make everybody aware, there used to be such a solution called Azure Data Warehouse. And you might have even looked it up within the tenant or within the calculator and found that it hasn't been there for some time. That has now been renamed Azure Synapse Analytics. Not a huge fan of their naming conventions and where they're going with it right now. Of course, as I get older, I don't adapt to change as well, and data warehouse has been in my mind for a long, long time. I guess the good news is that Microsoft changes the name of everything about every 2 or 3 years, so I won't have to put up with it for too long. But Azure Synapse Analytics is the Azure data warehousing, and the Azure Synapse link is a way to connect to the data warehouse itself. Typically in the past, the huge challenge when it comes to reporting on your data, or more importantly, getting in-depth insights into your data, and then be able to build upon that with machine learning and predictive analytics, has really been the fact that 9 times out of 10, our data is dirty, right? Due to COTS solutions in the past, using text input boxes for data. So really great, for instance, from my former life, we might have 10 different applications. And in each one of them, the state field was a free-form text field, and we must have had about 400 variations of the word Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or what have you. And then to be able to quickly build a report that builds upon that and leverages that data can be challenging, time-consuming, frustrating. So for years now, we've had to implement an ETL process, right, to actually transform that data, clean it up, make it more usable for reporting tools like SQL Server reporting services or Crystal reports or anything else, to be able to actually regurgitate that data in a clean format with legitimate sums and numbers and counts and things of that nature based on a cleaner version of that data. Also, you typically have to have some sort of middle tier to reside that data as you clean it and continue to transform it and test upon it before you actually put it into your data warehouse schema. And of course, those ETL processes, whether you built that in SQL Server integration services or a third-party solution, it took time and effort, and you had to change it and modify it as you continued to grow your databases or your tables or your data. And it's just extremely time consuming. It's why business intelligence has been on Microsoft's radar for going on 12 years now. There's always been great solutions for where we're at, during that time. But we all knew that the future of being able to rapidly create dynamic reports was always that one bridge too far in terms of being able to do it cheaply and efficiently. The great thing about Azure Synapse Link is it's literally a click or two of a button, and it performs built-in ETL processes for you based off the data that you have. I just want to give a disclaimer here. I've not had an opportunity to demo this myself or play around with it to see the efficiency, but this is version 1, so I imagine that there are going to be some hurdles and some issues, but it is the right path that we're looking for in terms of how to quickly and efficiently get our data cleaned and be in a usable format for us to start reporting upon, which kind of builds on to some of the conversations Mark had earlier, and some of the speakers earlier talked about Power BI, which I believe is an advanced tool that can rapidly create reports if the data is cleaned. This is that middle tier, right, that we've been waiting for in order for us to get those types of reports. Azure Synapse Links currently works with the Cosmos DB inside of Azure. It will be available soon for Azure SQL, whether it's Azure SQL Database or Azure Managed Instances. It will also be available for Azure databases for MySQL and Postgre, and then connections to Power BI as well. The great thing too about this, and the thing that I'm seeing probably more and more as time goes on, oddly enough, is that most organizations are still reporting against their transactional databases. So a main driver here is, I think we all ultimately know that the best practice is to not report on your transactional databases, reducing the number of locks that you'll have on your tables, making the application run much faster with the transactional database, and offloading those report mechanisms to a data warehouse, or at the very least a reporting database. A second topic that I wanted to talk about real quickly is Azure Peering Service. So real quick, to kind of explain the driver here, currently organizations have two choices in how they connect to Azure. One is through the public internet, routing through the public internet, and the other is using Azure Express Route, which is a direct connection to the Azure backbone, if you will, through your ISP. Azure Express Route is fairly expensive. They do have a large range in terms of the throughput of Azure Express Route that drives the cost. But generally speaking, for smaller organizations that need a higher level of throughput, Azure Express Route can be fairly expensive. Azure Peering Service is essentially the express route for internet access. So it's leveraging the public internet still to get through to your Azure tenant. However, Microsoft has worked with the ISPs and the internet exchange partners and software-defined cloud interconnect providers worldwide to provide reliable and high-performing public connectivity with optimal routing from your data center to the Microsoft network. Now, this is in preview, so I have not seen the pricing, but my expectation express route being on the other end, that's quite a bit more expensive. This will be that middle ground. So cloud services. You'll also have the ability to select the preferred service provider to connect to the Microsoft Cloud. You'll get traffic insights such as latency reporting and prefix monitoring, and you'll get some route analytics and statistics within the pane for your Azure peering service. As well as it also offers local and geo redundancy options within the peering service itself. Okay. The third and last thing that I'd like to talk about is the Azure Resource Template enhancement. So for anybody familiar with ARM or the Azure Resource Manager, you're able to create some templates that help automate some of the processes that you might have within your Azure tenant. In preview today, so this is a really great one to start playing around with while it's in preview. They're creating two types of new public preview scripts, if you will. One is called the what if analysis scripts, and one is the deployment scripts. So with the what if analysis, customers can leverage ARM templates to now assess the impact of a deployment to an environment before submitting any changes to the deployed resources. This is going to enable you to predetermine what resources will be created, updated, or deleted, including any property changes within the resources, with a simple execution with a what if command that you can roll back essentially. With the deployment scripts preview, you can now complete an end-to-end environment setup in a single ARM tenant. This resource is going to execute any PowerShell or Bash script as part of a customer's deployment, template deployment, and it can be included as part of an ARM template or reference from an external source. Out of this, when we come out with customers and start to stand up their Azure tenant or do a review or even sometimes a rebuild tenant, that we will typically leave behind these deployment scripts. For instance, if you have a hub and spoke model within your Azure tenant for subscriptions, and you need to, anytime you have a new department or a new agency and you need to spin up that subscription, you want to make sure that you're leveraging all the right governance and management groups and labels and billing and all of that great stuff, that you just fire off one of these deployment scripts to create that, and that you're following all the right guidelines that you have in your architectural documentation. That's all I have, Bob. Those were the ones that were of interest to me.
Awesome. I want to thank everybody for joining the call. There's one question, by the way, before we completely wrap up, that's actually in the chat window. And it says, for customers currently running Azure Data Warehouse, is there an upgrade path to Azure Synapse, or will Azure Data Warehouse still be supported?
That is a really good question. I've not come across an Azure Data Warehouse in some time. If you could just leave your email address in the chat window, I'd be more than happy to get back to you on that one.
Hey, Scott, this is Miguel.
Yeah.
Yep.
Miguel, so as far as an upgrade path, keep in mind that Synapse actually is one of the components, one of the 4 key components is Azure Data Warehouse. So it would actually be considered part of, and so it's not a one-to-one mapping, it's a subset. So if you think of Azure Data Warehouse as a single component, one of the 4 components of Azure Synapse, I would actually call that an upgrade path. So it will be part of that. There will actually be additional documentation coming from Microsoft that would allow for you to expand the Azure Data Warehouse you currently have into into snaps, and Nia already beat me to it. I was as soon as I saw that, heard that question coming across, I didn't look at the chat. I knew it was out there. So
thanks for hopping on, Mikkel.
no problem.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Nia. So we're at time. So it's just some housekeeping slides at the end and a thank you. I'm going to give everybody back a minute. I wanted to thank all the speakers on the call today. We've been working pretty hard to try to get this information and distill it down to what we think is the most important info for you. If you guys have any further questions that you didn't think about here, again, remember you can always use the You Already Own It at go-planet.com to send those questions. And with that, I'll call it a day. Thanks everyone for joining.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.